author DL Tillery here, the Mistress of Horror, and welcome back to my channel. Before we get started, how about you press that subscribe button, give this video a like, and ring that bell so you know when I'm uploading new videos. Welcome to Mistress Mood and Candlelight, where I give you a nice review and talk about a horror movie, book, or video game while I put on makeup. Here I am going to be talking about Stare, also sometimes known as Surusan. It is a nice, creepy Japanese horror movie that will give you the chills as you try to sleep at the night. Oh, this movie was so very interesting and gave me even the chills of Mistress of Horror. That being said, check out Stare. Watch this review and see what you think. There are spoilers here, I will warn you, because movies are a little harder to not spoil. Though I can manage sometimes, but when it's horror, I just can't hold back. If you do want to watch Stare without any spoilers whatsoever, if you are the horror inclined type like myself, then you will want to skip parts here and there. And at the end, I do give the ending, but I do give you 3 seconds to bow out and go to the very end of the video. So let's go ahead and listen to the review of Stare. And now it's time to review Stare, or sometimes called Suri-san. Let's jump into the creepiness. So this story follows 2 characters first, and then it shifts into 3 different ones. That being said, we are now priming for the premiere of Stare. My face has my primer ready to go, so let's blend it in while I blend you into the story. Like I said, this story follows 2 characters predominantly. There is a 3rd character that shows up that, plays a part. And this is just the main character, it's not the main monster. Duh, this obviously is horror because the show is about horror. Um, and I'm sure I said in the intro, it is a Japanese horror, and they know how to do the creepy to the creepiest extreme. This movie came out in 2020, so it is fairly still new to the scene, to be honest. And it does deliver, I will say. So again, it follows these 2 characters. The female lead name is Mizuki, and the male lead name is Hado. And they do have a third, like I said, the 3rd character that shows up later, but we'll talk about him when it's most time for him to show up. So it starts with Mizuki. She's in a cafe with her friend, and they're having coffee and chatting, and she's talking about, what's going on with her lately. She seems a little tense and stressed out. And then her friend kind of like glances out the window of the restaurant, and as if she's staring at someone. Already creepy feels start, and she gets up while they're in the middle of talking and continues to stare out the window. That's the big window pane that's next to them. Okay. So her friend looks at her like, what are you doing? And she stares, and then the camera just goes to the next scene. Just like that. Okay. Well, that's not weird at all. Then it goes to who will be named as the male lead, Hado, and he's in a convenience store, and he comes out with his bag, and he comes out the store, and then he receives a call. So he picks up the call, and it's his younger brother who is home, and he's obviously upset, and he's like saying, "I'm sorry," and he's like, "Well, what are you talking about?" Pretty much like, what's going on? And then they go to the younger brother scene, and he is in the dark apartment sitting against the door. It's the front door he's sitting against. and he's on the phone. And then he looks into the other room. Again, the apartment is black, pitch black. And he looks into the other room. There is a figure in the dark. No. He sees the figure, and then he's like saying, "I'm sorry," and like apologize. You know, people apologize before they like die. And a bell rings off to the side of him. He glances away from the figure that's in the other room. First mistake. So he glances away like that, glances back, eyes get big, screams, older brother, back to the old brother scene on the phone, like, "Oh my goodness, what's wrong?" And then the phone goes there. He runs home as fast as he can. He cannot get in when he gets there because unfortunately his brother's body is now blocking the entrance to the apartment. And then they zoom in on the younger brother, and his eyes are gone. Exploded, blown out, sticky mess, gone, dead. Bye, adios. Now you have the female lead, Mizuki, and the male lead, Hato, both dealing with loss of his brother and her best friend. So now, they got, you have the funerals, the death, going on, and they kind of like meet up because of the mysterious deaths of their loved ones. So the female lead's friend, they zoomed and they saw her. He saw her at the window, and then it went to the male lead's scene. So they get back to that and show what happened to the best friend. Well, she looked out the window, and then you hear the bell ringing thing. Then she like acts up and falls, and her friend's like, "What's going on? What's wrong?" She's like trying to get away from what she sees outside the window, but you looked away. So then she kind of like crawls a bit, and her friend's like, "Oh my God, what's wrong?" Like, this is a restaurant, it's like other people in there, or like people behind the counter and such. And then, everyone's like kind of like, "What's going on with her?" Then she turns back around, turns over, because she's kind of like on her hands and knees, turns over, and then looks above her as if someone is above her, and she screams, and her friend's like, and then blood, explosion of the eyes again, and she's dead, just like that, mysteriously, right in front of everyone. Like, no, no, just no, no, but that's what happened. So, creepiness settled in yet? Has it settled in yet? Well, that's the opening. That is the priming for the premiere. I, of course, was interested in this film right away because I am into Japanese horror, and I watch, obviously, as I said before, I watch predominantly Japanese, Korean, and Chinese dramas and or movies, whichever. And horror is obviously on the Mr. Horror, so horror is always going to be that. And Japanese horror is like some of the best horror. So this movie came out, and I was super interested in it, of course, because I'm a fan of Ringu and The Grudge. So, of course, anything with the supernatural females spirits coming after people, I'm going to be interested in. This follows right down that line. So we are primed for the premiere, and now it's time to get deeper into Stare. The two leads start investigating together because of the mysterious deaths of their loved ones. Okay, they get wind of the woman who they end up talking to, goes by the name Ika, and they get the information. They go to her house or whatever, and well, let's just say this was a big mistake on their part. And I'm going to warn you now, this is not necessarily spoiler free, because if the film being the fact that I tell you about it, is going to possibly, ruin it for you, because if you haven't seen it. If you don't want to know anything about this and go into it blind, then I don't really suggest you listen to too many details here. And you can always fast forward. That being said, they talk to Ego. They go there and they sit down, talk to her, and she starts to tell them this story of a young man who she heard the story from, right? Right. And so they were at this lodge or whatever, and he's this boy who's their young man. He tells the story like with his fingers, and he's like, "Oh, like this is the man," and he's like, "Why are you following me?" And then the man and the woman goes, "Because you've seen me and you know who I am," and he goes, "I don't know who you are." And so he tries to leave, and she keeps following him. So that's the general logistics of the story. And she's telling the same story and saying that this is the story that the boy told them. And like, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be listening to the story like somebody telling me, and it's related to the reason why my family members or friend mysteriously died weirdly. Not going to be listening to that. So that's no. If they die mysteriously, well, then that's nothing I can do. Like, I'm not going to go investigate. Like, this is for the cops. Leave it for the cops. Like, no. So as sitting at this table, she's telling them this tale of creepiness of the creepy of this woman who follows you once you hear of her. Okay? So the E tells the tale. I'm not gonna go into great detail, like exactly how the tale goes, or at least as far as the boy telling it to them. So the girl listens to it. There's a bunch of other younger people there with her, um, and they all hear it. And then he says her name, Shuri-san. So at the end, and he says she's coming for you, like that or whatever, like all of you. And they're like jumping, like, oh, he's telling a creepy story. Yeah, okay, it's a story, right? Mm-hmm. She said, well, I'm not gonna say her name right now. When she's telling the story, she doesn't mention the woman's name, and then I guess maybe she's like not fully disclosing everything at this point. So she doesn't say her name and skips that part, and then says like, and she was coming for you too, like that. And they're like, what the what? And then like she says she's gonna go make some tea or whatever, but she's gone a little too long. And then they cut to the scene, and she's like hanging herself in the room. Like, okay. Anyway, I'll come back to that. So the dude, the man lead, he like goes off because she's been gone a little too long, so he's like suspicious. And then he like sees her hanging, so he like goes over and grabs her legs, but she's like obviously choking, but she's not dead yet. And then he calls for the female lead. She comes running, and then they get her down, and then they call 911. And then when they're in the room waiting with her, like to try to make sure they keep her, awake and stuff, she says Shirozan's name. So now they know who she is. So the curse is activated at this point. You know who you've heard of her. How dare you hear of her? She doesn't like people knowing about her. And now you do, so the curse has passed. So they are cursed now. Thanks, chick who was just trying to end your life. What? At this point, the way the curse works is still not completely 100% understood by the characters and nor yourself as you're watching. But the girl just passed it to them by telling them the tale. That's how it passes. And since they heard about the boy who told her, they go and she's in the hospital, and then they go to the town where he is. So they get there at the same time. They start showing a reporter who's interested. This is the third character. I cannot recall his name at the moment. It's whatever, honestly. Um, but so he shows up at the town at the same time they do. You know, so they're all three investigating, and he seems to be skeptical. It's not like he believes in whatever, like the mysterious deaths. He don't know what's going on. This dude is married, by the way, just to put some context of him. He's married. His wife, he left town, so she's back home, They showed a sequence of him and his wife sitting in an apartment talking, and then his wife has a flashback of their daughter getting killed by a car accident. So a car hitting her when they were at the park, and she was playing and stuff. So they have trauma of losing their child, that being the thing. Meanwhile, before the female lead and the male lead went to investigate and see what happened with the younger man, um, there's small little things happening since they've been cursed, such as seeing your loved ones kind of out the corner of your eye, or maybe full on seeing them, or trying to have conversations with them. This is more or less, from what I gather, a sign that the curse is activated and that she will be coming for you soon. And she uses the people that have died, possibly the people who she has killed, or maybe not killed. As long as you have someone that that died, will possibly be the link that she uses to make you look away from her. So she starts using them, I think, early on is what it is, like a connection, so that way, she knows you love someone that passed. So I think she's using that. It seems quite early for that. They imply it later, for sure, but at this point you don't know that. You just kind of think that the leads are seeing their family members because they're friends and family members that passed by her, killing them because they're lost. That's what you're assuming at the moment. I'm quite sure that it's her doing it. Anyway, they go to the town. Then they start looking for the boy. Then they come across one of the boys that was at the gathering that he told the story at, and the reporter talks to him, and he tells the reporter the story of Shirasan. So, so he is now cursed because he heard the story, and it's kind of like passing it. So it's supposed to help you not die so soon, because she comes and kills you if you pass the story along. But you probably have to pass it to a lot more people. Obviously not one or two, because she still could come for you just as quickly either way. So the boy's like in his room. He won't come out. But the reporter talks to him, and this is how he gets cursed. Why then? Why? Why then does the frickin' reporter call his wife and ask, "Do you know Shunsan? Like, have you heard of her?" Like, what? Throw the whole husband away. He knows it's a curse at this point. Why would you talk to your wife about it? Let's say you didn't believe in such things, and you're like, I'm a reporter, and I just heard this thing, and it's like, whatever. But why would you randomly ask your wife that? Like, sir, I'm gonna have to ask you just to jump in the garbage yourself. Okay, just jump in the garbage. Throw the whole husband away. Meanwhile, nothing has happened yet to the two leads as far as her coming for them. But they do go back to the woman at the hospital, the one who told them and helped curse them. So they go back to her. She's in the hospital, okay? She's in the hallway, and the nurse comes in. She at the same time sees someone at the end of the hall stooping down, and then she stands. It's Sidu-san. That's right. She's coming for her now. It's her turn. Rather, she pass it on to two other people. This is not how she works. Good luck figuring it out, because they're going to be trying to figure it out too, to no avail. She like freaks out because she's like, there's somebody like down there, like asking the nurse that who happened to come through the door at the same time, right behind her. Like, do you see like this person down? Like, and she doesn't see anybody. She's like, what are you talking about? And she like realizes, like, when she looks at the nurse and then looks back, Shiru-san is closer. When you take your eyes off of her, she gets closer. No. And she looks terrible, by the way. All right, real quick, let me give you a description of her. Ghostly, pale skin, like pasty, kind of like not human, obviously. And her eyes are terrible. Like, the whole entirety of this is blackness with like a creepy line of red around it, like it's going to tear out of her head almost. And then her mouth area is like, you remember the Joker on Batman with Heath Ledger, and how he did the whole, like, his version of the Joker was a cut mouth. Her mouth looks kind of like that, but more rigid and torn. And then she like moves really slow, because at one point when the girl looks away and then looks back, she kind of like closer, and then she does like this bend of her body, like a contortionist or something. It's very creepy, very terrible, very very terrible. So that she's in the hall, the girl freaks out, the girl runs away. The nurse is kind of like, "What's wrong?" She cannot see Shiru-san down there. So the girl runs and runs and runs, and then she's like screaming, and she hides behind the wall, and then you see a shadow come in. Then you hear the nurse calling for her. She goes to look around the corner. The nurse is there, like, "What's the matter?" And then the nurse moves, and then Shiru-san is right behind her. Like, it's kind of like a creepy smile going on her face. No. She's in trouble. So she screams again and runs far down the hall, and she's constantly looking back. Shiru-san getting closer. As you don't look at her, she's getting closer and closer. So she falls in the hall and goes to turn around. Shiru-san is now close. Okay. Like I mentioned about her features, she has long, obviously dark black hair, and wears like a kimono robe style attire. And she has her hands in a prayer position, and the rope around, like a red rope around her, that has a bell on it, hence when you hear the bell. And she's right close to her, like so close to her. When she gets that close, it's too late. It's over. There is no, "I'm going to look at you now and stare at you so you won't move and get me." You've already looked away long enough. You must know who she is, and she doesn't want anyone to know who she is. So the girl goes to scream. Shiru-san's hands, the prayed position palms, they're not really in prayer position so much as a position like this, kind of like this here, but then they open up slowly. So when they open up slowly, your eyes explode, from what I gather. So the girl's dead. The nurse comes running down the hall, and she screams because she sees her destroyed body, like her eyes gone, and she screams, and then it goes back to the male and the female and the male lead. So now they are, hearing about the young man who told the original story. So what happened with him is, and this gives you a clue of how to possibly beat this curse. The one who told that multiple amount of people, like 6 people, 5 or 6 people he told in that room, he was doing that in order to be in another phase of her curse. And while he's telling the story, she was in the room looking at him. So he stirs up at the end of telling them all, like, 'cause she's standing over him, but not close enough to do the killing. So you get to the different phases, and I'll mention the other phase in a minute that the female lead and the male lead managed to get to. But you hear more about the young man who was telling the other people the story. He heard the story as a child from a teacher in his elementary school. Of what we call elementary school. It's not called elementary school in Japan, but that's just the translation of what they'll say. But so hears this from his teacher when he's younger, like a little kid. Like, this teacher is terrible. Apparently, he's trying to pass his curse to little kids. So he writes it down in a diary. But then he forgets because he's a kid and they're forgetful. So he's a older teenager now, like an adult age, like 8 to 19, I would gather. And he finds the book in his house, reads it, curse reactivated. So you have to, like, I'm gathering from my conclusion, you need to forget, and we'll get into how that does kind of solidify later. You need to forget her. She doesn't want you to know who she is. She will have to end you if you know who she is. She's going to come for you if you remember who she is. But who's going to forget something's coming for you? Who's going to forget a curse? Who's going to forget that? Not likely, unless you're forced to, or a kid, obviously. Yeah, this is not good for them. The boy who told all those people, since he remembered he got cursed, and that's when he's passing on, but they find out he is dead. Like, the curse came for him. The teacher who told him the story, you hear that he also died of supposed heart attack. So I don't know if her tactics was different back in the past or not. because everyone's eyes are getting blown out as far as I can see. I don't see anybody's heart getting like, oh, stopping. She upped her game, I guess. I don't know. But nonetheless, that's what's happening. The eyes are being exploded. So it's really messy the way she kills you. You have the female lead, the male lead, and the reporter now kind of like working together, spreading out, figuring out information. So until one night, the female lead she went to the store. They're at the lodge, because they're not in their town. They're out of town, and she's getting some, I guess, some snacks or whatever. She's walking back. The reporter and the male lead are talking back at the place, and then she gets to like the ring sound happen, the bell. The bell happens. She looks down the street, and there is the figure stooping down. Slowly stands to full height and is facing her. She calls the male lead, and he's like, "What?" And she's like, "Oh my gosh, she's here!" Like, and then he's like, keep staring at her because he, heard exactly about staring at her from the reporter, and she does. But then there's mist around, like all of a sudden there's mist. Why is there mist there? And then the mist kind of like fades in front of Shiru-san, and then like the female lead's like staring at her, trying to stare at her, so she keep her eye on her, and then like she disappears. And when she disappears, she figures this is a good time for me to run. Like, no chick. No chick. Well, then again, maybe, I don't know, she doesn't disappear, then she might disappear right next to you. And then if she's that close to you, it's over. So after she runs, she just takes off and runs, and then she ends up like this like construction, like this place is being fixed up. She falls, of course, on the way because she's like hysterical or whatever. So she does that, and then she's coming. She's on her way. She like either So then she keeps running. The male lead's trying to catch up to her. He's looking for her, calling her. So he's trying to catch up to her so he can make sure she remembers that she has to keep looking at her. You cannot take her out, which she's already done. While running, she's already done it. She's already like messed up to a degree here. Like she's already kind of fudged it a bit. Like she took her eyes off of her and fudged up. Either way, she can still manage to salvage this to a degree. He gets there and he's like, she's bent down and like not looking because she hears her friend behind her talking like, oh, I tried to, why'd you shrug my hand off? And I tried to hold your hand and blah, blah, blah. And she's like, oh, I know you're dead. Like, and puts her hand over her ears. And then she ducks down, but not looking at Shiru-san, who's right there. So she gets closer. She's moving real slow. Like, here I come. It's over for you in a second. As soon as I get over there. The male lead gets there. He stands her up like you have to look at her. He can't see her at the moment. So he's like, she's there like, okay, so let's back up. So they like back up. He said we need to retreat a bit away from her. So they get up against the wall and they keep watching her. Meantime, he's sitting there looking at in the direction she is. I don't think he can see her, but maybe he starts seeing her. They don't really clear that part up. And then she's still staring at her, crying. Like, girl, keep your eyes open, tears or not. And then her friend appears next to her, still talking to her like, oh, blah, 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 blah. And she's like, I'm sorry. And she like reaches her hand over, touch her ghostly hand, and then which seems to manifest it somehow. And then she reaches her second hand over and puts her hand on top of her hand. And then she's like, I'm sorry and stuff like that. I wanted to still be friends with you, be there for you and stuff. But trying to keep her eyes on her still, so he's like, what's wrong or whatever. And then she says nothing. And then he stands them up. So we need to get around her, get out of here. She's like staring like cold dead into their souls with her blackness of eyes. It's not even eyes at this point. So they try to make a wide circle around her, like scooting while keeping her. And she's like turning slowly with them, keeping her eyes on them the entire time. I'm like, this woman, she's so creepy. So she looks at them, and then the girl stirs a little too hard, like into her eyes, like without blinking, and then it kind of like sucks her mind into her mind, which is I don't know what's going on. I think this is like the second phase. Like if you make it through the first phase and you stare her down like that close, kind of somewhat close, then you get pulled into her mind. So she's now the female lead is not inside this monster's mind, and it's like a room with like a bunch of like the protection papers hanging on the wall, covering this whole wall with candlelight only in the room that she's sitting in. She like looks through the doorway at her, and she kind of slightly looks over her shoulder. Sudo-san does, at the female lead, and then she's like, and then she like wakes up. Then it's the next morning. Her and the guy are like passed out in the same place they were in, and they're like convinced that they beat it, that they're saved or whatever. Heck, you know. So then they like go back to where the reporter is and everything, and then they're still trying to figure out how to beat the curse, how others would beat the curse. So at this point, those two are convinced that they've been saved. The reporter hasn't had any kind of like, you know, show that he's cursed. Like, you know, he's still like not necessarily believing this, whatever. So, you know, they decide they're going to leave the town. There's not much more they could do here. The last boy that was alive, who was of the group that the other boy told about, he was still alive. He was in his room still. His mom's at home with him. Then they show him like look out the window because he hears the bell, and then he must see Shiryu-san. They don't really show it directly, but we already know what's happening. We know what's happening. Okay, so he like you hear him scream. He like falls back because she's outside, and then he closes the curtain. He can't see her, so then she appears in his room, and then you hear his mom knock on the door like, "Oh, what's going on?" But she doesn't open the door. She's like, "I'm gonna open the door." He hears him scream and a splat. You know what happened. She looks in. His eyes are gone, exploded. She got him. So they're ready to leave town. Why did their car break down? Once they're on the side of the road, the car is broke smoking. The reporter's driving, so he stops and he's like, oh, he gets out and checks it. Like, this is bad. And then they're like, well, we have no signal because he's like trying to signal or whatever. That's not working, okay? Like, you on the side of a country road. Good luck with getting a signal, okay? So, mind you, he's just like, she's now the female leader sitting there for a while, you know, whatever, and she's trying to figure out this curse still. And she's like, I calculated that, she's like writing in her book, I calculated she comes every 3 days, right? So she's evidence based off of what happened to them. She's showing up every 3 days. She shows up and gets someone, right? So because of the amount of people, so she's like, well, the amount of people seems to make a difference about when she would show up to get you. Okay, so she is, making up the math and doing the math and things and like figuring out when she would come for you again and all this and that. The reporter, meanwhile, sitting there like, what? And then she's like, I don't know if this is right. Then she said, it's a percentage of when she would come and get you. And they're like, what? And then she says, like, well, it has to be like the amount of people involved. And then meanwhile, while doing this, the reporter remembers like, oh, that's right, my freaking wife. I told her about her. So the curse, and I guess now he really believes, right? So because all these people were dying, so he's like, oh yeah, that's right. I told my wife randomly for no freaking reason. So since he told his wife, now he's like, well, he's trying to start this car that obviously is dead. So he's trying to start the car. And he's freaking out, and she's like, well, the wait rate when she would come to somebody, if you average out the amount of time, like your life, like most people live to 80 years, right? And then this is what she's saying. Most people live 80 years, so she would come if you were the only person cursed. She would come like 30,000 times or something like that. Then it cuts down the amount of time she would come, and then you add a third person, and it cuts it down more. So then she's like, well, 10,000 times, and then so she does the math or whatever, right? And they're like, what? And then they're convinced that that's probably correct. What's been happening so far? When this happens, like I said, the reporter is now freaking out, and he's worried about his wife. Then they flash to his wife for a second because he's trying to get a signal and call her, but there's no signal to be had. Then he's like, well, if this is the case, then we need to spread the curse further with more people, like 100,000 people need to see this or hear this, blah, blah, blah. And they're both like, no, we don't know for sure. That doesn't mean people aren't going to die. There's definitely going to be people that's going to die. We can't do this. He's like, not convinced we're doing this. He's trying to get a signal on his computer. I'm like, y'all probably shouldn't freak out that much because honestly, he is not getting a signal on that laptop. I mean, he can't get one with his phone. I doubt he's going to be getting one with his laptop. So they freak out. They're like, no, you can't do this. So they're trying to get it from him, and they're near a cliff. You imagine what's about to happen, right? You know what's about to happen. They're near a cliff, and like they wrestle a little bit, and the two males are kind of like trying to pull, blah, blah, blah. And then she kind of like comes up kind of behind the male lead who's trying to pull the laptop from the reporter, and she kind of gets knocked at the same time the laptop falls, and she gets knocked off as well, and then hits her head on this big boulder looking thing she's laying on top of. And then Hiro's like, oh no, like blah, Mizuki, like that. And then the reporter's like, I'm sorry, and like goes off with his cell phone trying to call his wife desperately. Meantime, Hiro's trying to like get down to her, and he's trying to call for help. He gets down to her and it's like calling for help, like, oh, someone help me. There's no one out there. They were waiting for a car to come by at this point. So I don't know if I remember if he tries to pull his cell phone out or whatever, but he's like crying for help. They go to show the reporter who calls his wife, who finally is able to get a signal because he walked for a little bit into like a brush or whatever, like a willow path is, like a long path down. It's like surrounded by trees and stuff. So he gets through to his wife and he's like trying to tell her, like, if she comes, blah, 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 Sarah, blah, blah. And, I'm sorry, and all this and that. And then he sees Suru-san down the way, stooping as she does. So, as he's doing that, and I'm trying to apologize to his wife on the phone, and he sees Suru-san, he knows she's going to get him because he can't stare at forever. Hence, is the problem with this one. And he hears his daughter behind him. Here we go with the family member thing again. And she's telling, like, Daddy, Daddy, turn around, look at me, Daddy. He's like, you're not really there, you're not her, blah, blah, blah. But, he can see his resolve is weakening because he wants to see his daughter so bad. Because she was a little girl, like, probably like 6 or something. And I can understand that, having a daughter myself. But in this case, not in this case. Like, I can understand wanting to see her, but obviously the monster is in control of this. And then he turns around finally because the phone goes to disconnect from his wife because the signal wasn't good anyway. She's like, what? And he turns around to look at his daughter he hasn't seen in a long time. And he smiles. And then Suru-san is right behind him. And she kind of comes half around. And then that's it. And then it goes back to the male lead and female lead. And we're about to wrap up with the conclusion of Stare. So, to conclude, Stare, my final look, and time for the closing. Stare ends. Now, if you don't want to know the ending, then now's the time to fast forward to the very end, very, very end of this video. You have 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Spoiler of the ending. Now, the ending. Like I said, the female lead had hit her head. The reporter is dead. It's only the male lead and the female lead left. So it goes to the hospital scene. She doesn't remember anything to do with the curse. She doesn't remember Suru-san. And she doesn't remember the reporter or the male lead, as she kind of has grown close to. He comes to check on her when he gets a call from the hospital. And they tell him that. So he goes in to see her. And she doesn't remember him. He doesn't say anything besides I was just passing by when I saw you hurt. So he doesn't want her to remember because he knows this will save her. He has concluded. And so by him being there, though, she seems to remember something. She said, I have a bitter taste in my mouth. At one sequence in the movie, they have a meal together. Her fish, the burnt looking fish that she made was a bit bitter. And she says, I have a bitter taste in my mouth. I don't remember. There's something I need to remember that was important, it seems. And he says, well, he figures out if I stay around her, she's going to remember. So he leaves and says goodbye to her. She says goodbye. She looks, glances out the window, and then it leaves that, follows him to the train tracks where, it closes the line down so the train can go by. As this is happening, he looks across the way, and there is Suru-san come for him. It's his turn. So the train goes by. He could see her in between the train the cars going by, the train cars going by. And then when the last one goes by, she's gone. She's not there. So his eyes were off of her, but on her, off of her, on her, off her, on her, off of her. So she's behind him now. and he feels her presence, and he goes to turn around to look at her. She kind of comes around him and turns her head slightly. And then it's the foreboding, this feel that you can feel even through the screen. And end. That is Stare. That's the ending. I really enjoyed Stare. I thought it was very good. The creepy levels were high. Just the female creature, the monster, the bad guy, was very, very creepy. You could feel it. It was done very well. Just the build up, and then the outcome, and then the reasoning, and then you're not escaping. Even with the theory of the female had came up with that if a lot of people had been cursed by her, the chance of her coming to get you would be 0.01% if it was like, I'll say 100,000 people infected with the curse. The only real way out of the curse is obviously to forget you ever heard of her and ever heard her story. Hence, the female lead makes it because she can't remember. The male lead did not, unfortunately, get as lucky as that. So that's there. You should check it out. Very good movie. Very creepy. Great for Halloween if you don't watch horror movies year round. And that's it for Mistress Mood and Candlelight for this time around. I'm thinking the next thing that's going to be on the next episode for May is more likely going to be a book, because I like to rotate around from once I hit the book, then a movie, then a video game. So, and then back around again. So movie kind of started it off, then I went to video game, went to book, then video game. So we're back around to time for a book review. And I will see you in the next one. Stay scared. But you know, you're trying to stare at her and all that stuff. She said, but then if you add a second person, then it cuts down.